He is, of course, Scott Ritter, one of our go-to people on intelligence, weapons, and military tactics with respect to whatever is going on in Ukraine. Scott, it's a pleasure. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
The Russians are silent in the face of Ukrainian claims that they're on the offensive and they have taken back about 150 square miles. I mean, I know what that is numerically. I don't know how much real estate that is realistically of Ukraine territory from the Russians. Where do things stand today as you see them from public sources and from your private sources?
Well, there's no doubt that Ukraine has launched a major counteroffensive effort in two places. One in the vicinity of Kherson in the south, the other one just south of Kharkov in the vicinity of the city of Izium. These are major efforts. Ukraine has spent the last, and you and I have had this conversation in the past. When I spoke out in April about the billions of dollars of military aid coming in and the strategic depth that was being provided, I said this is a game changer. I mean, the fact of the matter is Russia's destroying the Ukrainian army, but NATO's reconstituting it. And what we've seen here is the reconstituted Ukrainian army being thrown into battle. The problem for Ukraine isn't the quality of these troops. These are outstanding troops. They have new tactics, they have new equipment, and they're doing quite well. The problem is there's not enough of them. They struck in areas where the Russian lines are weak. Russia only has 200,000 troops covering a very big battle zone. And there are certain areas where these troops are oftentimes in strong points that are separated by 1 to 5 kilometers, and they cover the distance in between with artillery fire, et cetera. But if you hit it with a strong force, a concerted force with artillery backup, you can punch a hole through there, and that's what the Ukrainians have done.
All right, let me ask you a few specific questions.
Sure.
I know you're in the middle of a fascinating narrative, but you piqued my interest.
Sure.
Russia has 200,000 troops in Ukraine or available for Ukraine, right? That's what you meant by that.
Committed to the Ukraine theater.
Okay. Yeah. And how many troops does Ukraine have? What's the order of magnitude here?
Ukraine has around 700,000 troops under arms.
Ukraine has 2.5 times.
Three and a
half times what Russia has available.
Yes. I mean, committed.
Wouldn't that tell you that Ukraine is going to prevail?
Not necessarily, because Russia has supremacy in firepower. Russia has a better logistics support system. The Russian logistics doesn't have to come up through hundreds of kilometers of territory being bombed constantly by the Ukrainian Air Force. Ukraine's logistics is being bombed every day by Russian cruise missiles and the Air Force. And frankly speaking, the Ukrainians have suffered horrific casualties. Their officer corps has been decimated. Some estimates are that up to 60% of their pre-war officers have been killed or wounded. And the officers that's what makes your military tick. If you have good officers, your military performs fairly well. If you have bad officers or weak officers or untested officers, it's difficult to execute complicated maneuvers. So the Ukrainians are suffering, but that's why these new reserves are so important, because these are very well-trained troops.
So these 700,000 troops are overwhelmingly grunts rather than officers.
Correct, and most of them are actually reservists and territorial defense units, poorly trained. And frankly speaking, in the case of the territorial defense units who've been mobilized and sent to the front, poorly motivated. These are people who aren't thrilled about giving their lives for their country, and yet that's what they're being asked to do.
One of the pieces you and I read this past week was that the city council of St. Petersburg has condemned President Putin as a traitor. Are they still walking free, or have they been arrested for that?
No, this is an old story. This isn't the first time. They've done this several times. They're staunch opponents of this war. As much as people like to call Putin an autocrat and a dictator, Russia's a functioning democracy. These are people who are elected representatives, and they're fulfilling their duty as they see it. But this is like having 6 San Francisco city council members call Donald Trump a traitor. Yay. Now do something about it. I mean, while Donald Trump was president, it's meaningless. It's pure propaganda. It's literally nothing. I don't think Putin knows about it. And if he does, I don't think he cares about it. And if he is even focused on it, he's laughing about it, because this is not serious. Only the West would magnify something like this and make it a news story.
Is he as stable in his office with respect to his ability to control the military and the intelligence services as he has been? Or are there any cracks in his stability?
Well, again, I'm not there, so I can't. I don't have. I'll say this is an objective observer looking at him long distance. He is the most stable, mature leader of significance in the world today, right alongside the Chinese leader, Xi Jinping. There's no one in the West that comes close to this man's, stability, maturity, and level-headedness. If only all leaders were like this.
We keep reading that. We keep reading that Secretary of State Blinken showed up or made available another $2 billion worth of equipment. That Secretary of Defense Austin made available another $750 million worth of equipment. I am assuming that these are chunks of money and equipment from the 50 or 60 billion that Congress authorized a while ago. This is not coming from a slush fund, and this is not in addition to that. Am I correct in that assumption?
You're correct. This comes from the monies appropriated by Congress on May 21st of this year. Okay. That pot of money, it's now it's being released in chunks. What's interesting about that, if I might, one, a lot of this equipment isn't being provided immediately. A lot of this equipment is being earmarked for production, which means the Ukrainians aren't going to see this stuff until 2023, and I don't think there's going to be Ukraine by then. The equipment we've provided them, which is billions of dollars, and NATO as well, is all being destroyed right now. The rest of the story on the offensive is the offensive's over. The Russians are counterattacking. They're slaughtering the Ukrainians. Russia will regain all the lost territory in the next couple days, and Ukraine will have succeeded only in losing the reserves that they took months building up. This is one of the most foolish military moves in modern history, purely political in nature, and it's so far it's cost Ukraine around 6,000 killed in action.
Do we have serious, sophisticated military people, like say you or McGregor, but active duty military, advising President Zelensky or whoever is the chief of staff of the military before they make these decisions, one of which you have characterized as foolish and disastrous?
Well, remember, our goal isn't to help Ukraine win. I mean, we make lip service to that, but Lloyd Austin made clear what our goal is, and that is to have the Ukrainians inflict such damage on the Russian military that the Russians won't be able to repeat the Ukrainian exercise going forward. So we're encouraging the Ukrainians to launch this kind of foolhardy attack. And this is where it gets really sickening, because we know what the end result is going to be. We're just hoping that before all the Ukrainians die, whom we just trained and equipped, that they're able to kill a number of Russians. But ask yourself, why did the Ukrainians take so much territory so quick? Because the Russians aren't willing to die for foolish reasons. The Russians, recognizing that the Ukrainians had achieved momentary superiority on a specific point in the battlefield, withdrew with limited casualties, sucking the Ukrainians in until the Ukrainians spent their force. Now the Russians are pinching them off and slaughtering them. Any general knew this was going to happen.
Did you just say a few minutes ago that you don't know that there will be a Ukraine in the future? And if you did, what do you mean by that? I was under the understanding that your view is that once Putin gets the eastern part of the country that he wants, he stops. He's not going to destroy the government.
Well, he'll stop because he doesn't want to necessarily. First of all, the government's gone. The Russians have made it clear that this is a rogue nation and never to be trusted again, and that whatever exists post-conflict won't be the Zelensky government.
Well, does that mean that they're going to invade Kiev?
That's up to the Ukrainians. What Russia will not tolerate, in my opinion, is a situation where you have a demilitarized zone where you have a viable Ukrainian military on the other end shelling civilian cities and towns. That won't happen. So this war ends with the total surrender of Ukraine, at which point in time Ukraine decides to totally capitulate is up to Ukraine. If they want to capitulate after Russia has taken Novorossiya, fine. But if they want to continue to fight, then Russia will take the fight to them and will destroy them. The Russians have made it clear. Demilitarization means the total, not annihilation, but the total dismemberment of this NATO military that's being built. And believe me, what's in Ukraine right now is a NATO military. Russia is at war with NATO as we speak. This is no longer Ukrainian military. These are Ukrainian men.
What countries in NATO have been providing assistance besides the United States?
Virtually all of NATO, to be honest. We have Germany, we have Great Britain, we have Spain, we have the Netherlands, we have Italy. I think we could go down we have all of the Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia. They've all, in one shape or form or another, have provided. Norway have provided equipment to Turkey, have provided equipment to the Ukrainian military. I mean, it's unreal.
Are they tempting targets to President Putin?
These nations?
Yes, or at least their storehouses of military equipment before it leaves Warsaw and goes to Kyiv.
No, again, Putin is one of the most mature, level-headed leaders. It is not the goal of Russia to engage in a fight with NATO. This war will be limited to Ukraine unless NATO opts otherwise. But Russia will not initiate military action against NATO targets. It makes things more difficult for the Russians. You and I know that. There's weaponry coming in. It makes the fight difficult. But Russia has its eye on the target, and the target is the denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine, and then leveraging this military victory into a diplomatic victory, which is the new European security framework. You can't discuss a new European security framework with Europe if you're at war with Europe.
And the new European security framework in Putin's mind will be a Ukraine, I don't know what the adjective will be, neutral, demilitarized. Let's leave the adjective out for a minute, but it will not be aligned with the West.
That is correct. It would also be a Europe, a NATO that withdraws NATO-only infrastructure back to the 1997 boundaries. Russia's not asking for the dismemberment of NATO. They're not saying, hey, Poland, you got to leave, the Baltics, you got to leave. Russia's fine with NATO. Russia has no problem with. They just don't want NATO infrastructure, for instance, on their border or near their border. They don't want NATO troops in Poland. Poland can have whatever army it wants, but Russia does not want NATO troops in Poland or NATO troops in the Baltics.
All right, I got to ask you a couple questions that I ask you every time, and I guess this is speculation unless your intel buddies are speaking with you. Is the intelligence community telling the president the truth? Does he understand what's going on the ground, or is he getting his information from the New York Times and the Washington Post?
No, I believe the president. Look, the stated policy of the United States is to bleed Russia, and I believe the intelligence community is telling the president that the best way to bleed Russia is to provide Ukraine with modern weaponry, and allow the Ukrainians to try and level the playing field so they can kill at least as many Russians as the Russians are killing. The problem is the Russians are much better, and this is where I think the president might not be getting the full story, because I still believe the intelligence community has a lower opinion of the Russian military than reality dictates, and has a higher opinion of the Ukrainian military than reality dictates.
And those are honestly held opinions or politically influenced opinions to please their boss in the Oval Office?
I think it's unfortunately the latter. Look, there's very good analysts at the ground level who are writing solid analysis, but then it goes up to the mid-level management who massages it and turns it into something that the upper level management can, give to the president like the sycophants they are. The intelligence community has lost the ability to stare the president in the eye and tell him something he doesn't want to hear. They lost that a long time ago.
Next question that I have put to you many times. It's just about the middle of September. In 2 months, it's going to be very cold there. Will winter influence the outcome of this conflagration? And I mean winter big picture. The Germans are going to be cold. They don't have, as far as we know, there aren't German troops on the ground, but the German chancellor is going to have to do something to get fuel from Russia. So are they still going to be fighting? Is winter going to bring a quick end to this, or do the Russians not care and they'll trudge through winter and wait for the spring?
Well, the Russians aren't letting the calendar drive things. They're going to let events drive things. And the winter is a big player. We know right now that the Ukrainians are short of cold weather gear, and they've put out a desperate plea to NATO for 200 sets of cold weather gear. And NATO says we might be able to give you 100,000. So the Ukrainian troops,
200,000.
right, 200,000 sets of cold weather gear. Russia, on the other hand, everybody's going to be warm. But the big issue is the way Russia's pursuing this conflict. They're chewing up all this equipment that NATO provides. They're chewing it up on the battlefield. That's why you see this continuous resupply effort going in. Come wintertime, when the European economy collapses, two things are going to happen. One, the people aren't going to tolerate the diversion of resources to Ukraine when they desperately need resources. And two, I believe there's going to be rioting in the streets and governments are going to fall because of their support for Ukraine at the expense of the security of their nations. And when I mean security, I mean energy security. The fact that Germany is going to be freezing is inexcusable. The fact that the rest of Europe is going to be free. Businesses are shutting down as we speak. People are becoming unemployed. And this will not end well for Germany.
Germany has the strongest economy in Europe.
Not anymore.
They're going to be suffering horrifically this winter if the battle is still going on, and the chancellor hasn't changed his mind.
Not yet. I mean, look, Germany is waking up to a couple realities. One, they're not getting any more Russian gas. They've been playing that game, and the Russians just
how can they get through the winter without Russian gas?
They can't. That's the problem. And so now the question comes: how quick will it take the German people to remove Scholz and replace him with a German leader where common sense prevails? But the sad fact is that even if they replace this leader in November, you can't replenish the gas. The gas needs to be stored in facilities. You can't get enough gas there quickly. The Germans are going to suffer no matter what. This is going to be a very tragic, very long, very cold winter for Germany.
Okay, the military equipment that we are sending there, is it still from our surplus or is it from our needs?
I don't believe we have too much surplus left. I believe that, and I also believe that we've come to the point where we've stripped so much away from our active forces and our reserve forces that we're actually damaging our potential to wage war against a peer level force in the future. A lot of the stuff that's being allocated right now, I believe, is being earmarked for production. That is, we're going to open up the production lines. We're going to produce equipment directly for Ukraine, which is unprecedented. We're going to be building Ukrainian HIMARS, Ukrainian artillery, Ukrainian trucks. But as I said, I don't think there's going to be a Ukraine this time next year. So, yay, go ahead and build it. Then we'll have it for ourselves.
Scott Ritter, always a pleasure. No matter what we talk about, you're so courageous and forceful and right on the mark. Thank you very much for joining us.